Good morning, everybody. My name is Jane Sherlock, and I'm here today to talk to you about the different kinds of writing that you need to be doing for the HSC. Before we start, however, it's very important that we acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia, recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And of course, we pay our respect to the elders past, present and those of you who are emerging, and a special welcome to all the Indigenous students throughout New South Wales. This particular image I have here is of the Darul people. I live in Kiama and that's where I'm speaking from today, and it's a very important Indigenous area of the Wadi Wadi tribe. So that's a very proud connection that we have in this area. So yes, it's been a tough year, hasn't it? And congratulations to each of you, students and teachers, for the resilience, for the perseverance, the patience. And I think what we've started to realise is, of course, that schools aren't too bad, are they, as places to be? And relationships we have with one another is very significant. Certainly the HSC is very important, but how we come out of this in the end, I think, is something we can be proud of. So looking ahead to October this year, what I want you to try to develop is to try and get rid of that aspect of being frightened about the HSC. You're in good company. There's about 75,000 of you throughout the state who will be doing this particular exam. And of course, one of the ways that we become confident is, of course, building our familiarity. And I know it's a bit I suppose precious to say, let's try and normalise the HSC, because there's nothing normal about it, but let's try and build your familiarity and confidence so that when you go into that exam, you've already set yourself up into similar situations. And you know, there are a lot of people out there supporting you and a lot of people who can provide some excellent resources for you. So what I'm going to be doing now is to say, well, where are you at the moment? Because as we speak to you in this fortnight over the June situation, some of you are going to be in many different places. I want to talk to you about some of the resources that you can access. One of the things that I think is important about the HSC is how do the various modules how different are they? Because there is a bit of a tendency sometimes to think about them all as close or critical study. And then briefly, some skills for paper 1, and also very briefly for paper 2, because you've already had, if not already, some fantastic presentations on the individual text for modules, or you're about to have them. Okay, so where are you now? And that's the important thing to think about it. I would like to think that you are actually starting to think about reading or reviewing or rereading your text. And these are the texts, of course, for the common module. And it's easy to sort of think, well, I read that last year, I don't need to review it. Well, when you were reading it, you were just trying to get a hold on who's who and what's going on, what's the chronology. But now you need to be rereading all of those texts. You've only got the one novel to be doing in any 1 year. And so there's not a huge reading onus on you, but I know that you've got many other aspects in your life at the moment. So I want you to start saying and thinking, how many times have I actually viewed The Castle or viewed Bright Star? How many times have I read Richard III, for example? And have you done this for all of the modules? So here is my first tip for you, is that next time you are rereading them, and you've got a holiday break coming up, and then you've got the next one after that, it's really important that you start rereading and reviewing your text, this time through the lens of the particular module that you're doing, the module statement that you have been given for each one of those, the common module, module A, B, and of course, module C. So in rereading those, distill those module statements into a few key phrases. So, you know, think about, for example, if you're looking at the common module, that when you're now going to be rereading 1984 or Past the Shallows or Merchant of Venice or Crucible or rewatching Billy Elliot or any one of those, that you'll be now looking for specific human experiences. Maybe you are going to be reviewing or re-looking at your module A in standard. And so this time, let's look at all of the different kinds of examples as you're reading these texts for culture and identity. When you're reviewing and reading your Module B in Standard, you are looking for those distinctive features. So those of you who are doing Feed or Curious, you can be then saying, what is distinctive? Now that I get the story and I know who the characters are, what is distinctive about this particular novel? Maybe you're looking at Module A in advance. And so as you're reading through Donne and Wit or Keats and Bright Star or Tempest and Hagseed or the Richards, you're constantly thinking, how did the context of the first text, the older text, how did that shape some of the ideas and of course some of the form and the features, and similarly with the older text. And then when we get to Module C, if you're rereading Lady of Shalott or Crouch End or Margaret Atwood's speech, you are now looking at how have they crafted this piece of work? What is it about their craft that is effective? So these are the kinds of lens, if you like, that you could be putting on when you are rereading and reviewing your text. So think about, where are you now? Because with you might have a text that isn't able to be sourced through an electronic form. And I think that's got a lot of value to it. So for example, a few years ago, I discovered The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime as a PDF online. I'm sure, the hundreds and hundreds of you who were doing that already know this. But I found that if I searched for all the colours, the reds and the yellows, which is so significant for Christopher, I came up with some really interesting quotes from throughout the entire book. Now, that was a very simple thing to do. Similarly, I was rereading All the Light You Cannot See, and so I just did a word search for light. And I found that to be quite extraordinary, because you've got a whole lot of different kinds of lights. The Crucible, I did a word search for darkness and dark, and wow, is that a word that comes up in so many different areas. Have a look for Power and Fear, for example, in 1984. Past the Shallows, of course, the ocean is such a critical metaphor and a critical component of the setting, as well as how the characters interact. So they're just simple things to do. Now, also, if you're doing a film, there are many scripts available, for some of the films, not all of the films. But looking for Richard, for example, I find it absolutely invaluable in looking at the script as I'm watching the documentary, or I actually use the script now to find some excellent quotes and some features. So it is a very, very valuable script. Bright Star has a marvelous script, and so you can sit there and be reviewing your film, going through, seeing where the poems intersect. Similarly with The Truman Show. So I'm not sure that there are scripts for all of the films, but have a look at do a search and see if you can find them, because they really are very useful in your revision. Now think about this also. How much reading and viewing have you done outside your text? And this is not just for advanced, which we expect that to be part and parcel of the course, but it is also for standard, because it enhances your insights. I mean, I've been, looking at literature in the context of teaching English for about 43 years now, and yet I still need to have my insights sharpened. I still need to gain some new ideas about text. And the way to do that is to read what other people have said. It's also a way of building your vocabulary. And certainly as a marker, and particularly years ago in marking standard, one of the features that really differentiated the bands in the scripts was, of course, the vocabulary. And it's really important that you can build your vocabulary. These will give you some interesting, clever phrases that you can use. So look at some film reviews. Those of you who are doing Bright Star or looking for Richard or The Castle or any of those areas, look at what the film reviews when they first came out. Have a look at the movie site for IMDb for more details. I love reading the best quotes of The Castle, because they're the quotes that you can use, and also they give you often some little YouTube that you can have a look at. Literary reviews, and so you can find those online, or you can talk to your school librarian or the local librarian. Please don't overlook the local library. They're there, and they've often got excellent resources for the HSC. In fact, many of them have dedicated areas for HSC resources. Think about academic articles on the text or on the composer. Screen Australia is a wonderful resource and have produced many, many excellent articles on a range of different films, including Bright Star and The Castle. The State Library is a marvellous site, particularly those of you who are also doing Extension 2, but there's a lot of excellent resources. And of course, our own Metaphor, which has been produced now for 50 years, and there are some excellent articles. Just recently, there was a terrific article on Henry IV and also on Bright Star. So think about looking into those. And also the ETA has an arrangement now, as a partnership with Cambridge, the academic company of publishers, and their checkpoints, and I'll talk about those a little bit more. So also, how much viewing are you doing? If you're doing 1984, and I know that there are thousands of you who are doing that, there really is an extraordinary short documentary. It's only 55 minutes long, and it's called My Life in Pictures, Orwell, My Life in Pictures. Please have a look at it, because it's a docudrama, but it just makes sense. It just clarifies so much of Orwell's life. There's a marvellous TED Talk on M.T. Anderson if you're going to be doing feed, for example. Please have a look at the various websites for stage productions, because if you look at Namatjira, for example, Belvoir have produced it, and they've got some wonderful sites there, some wonderful images of the actual performance. There's also a very good DVD on Albert Namatjira, which has some of the scenes interspersed throughout it. Author websites, I mean, there's just so many author websites which give you some wonderful material. And as I said there, the theatre company productions, there's so many wonderful productions of The Crucible, or even just look at the posters of Henry IV, Merchant of Venice, when it was done in Sydney a few years ago, also when Bell did Richard III, and similarly with The Tempest. And Bell are actually releasing some of those at the moment for schools to be tapping into. And of course, film versions of your Shakespeare texts. The reality is that you are not going to be probably able to see your Shakespeare text, because they're not always showing, being performed all the time. So your next best version, of course, is the film version. So if you're doing Henry IV at the moment, I've just had a look at The Hollow Crown, and even though it's not in exactly the same order as the play, it really gives you the context, and it gives you the flavour, particularly of those, those wonderful scenes with Falstaff. And it also differentiates Howell and Hotspur and Henry very well as also. And of course, the fantastic production of Richard III. So think about those, because they will bring all of these plays to life, so much more than we can do for you in the classroom. Now, also the other thing is the best way, of course, to become a writer is to write, but you also need to be fueling your own imagination, especially for craft of writing, and your own worldview. And I've put this image there of Mouse, which I know some schools have suggested as a related text for The Merchant of Venice. And it really is a fabulous one to look at. And look at it at these kind of texts as ways of growing your own worldview of what's happening around the world, but also of growing your own imagination. And of course, I know that newspapers are, a very old world, but they still provide for you some terrific discursive articles, some wonderful opinion pieces, persuasive writing, and of course, some excellent visuals through the form of editorials. Verse novels, I wasn't a fan of verse novels, and now I've become a convert, particularly through the work of Sarah Crossan, who I just absolutely adore. You might want to look at some poetry anthologies. There's a new one by Paul Kelly, and that really does lift this whole idea about the joy of poetry. So where are you now? You've got a lot of, you will have done some of your assessment tasks, but some of you will still have more to do. Some of you may not have done your craft of writing, for example. Those assessment tasks that you've already done, don't just discard them. Get them out and say, how can I use this for my own revision? And so, for example, rewrite them now with different questions. And so we've all done the multimodal, especially a lot of people have done it in the form of for the common module. So get hold of that. Have a look at the notes that you might have put into your PowerPoint or into your Prezi. Take those out and put them into a Word document and use those now to rewrite them without, of course, the related text, but just the prescribed text. Rewrite them now for a series of different kinds of questions. The other thing is that have you actually seen some exemplar tasks from other students? Ask your teacher. It used to be something that I did as just part of the course, that every time I gave back a piece of writing, I would give every student in the class a copy of the best few. And that was such a buzz for the students whose work was being shared, but it also gave my students a sense that this is what they could achieve if their own peers in their own class could do that. And again, it's like reading what I was telling you before. It gives you an idea for elevate your vocabulary, some good phrases, or even an approach, a perspective that you may not have actually thought about. Now, some of you certainly, there's only a few schools that will have done their trial by now. So you've still got that trial that could be looming in third term. And for some of you, you will be doing that quite early in third term. And so you need to be thinking about the importance of that trial and to treat it with the respect that it needs, because for many of you, it's going to be 1/3, and it's going to be your opportunity to consolidate and really move yourself in a good position. Of course, the trial is still to happen. When you finish in late September, you're actually going to be having a longer study vacation period. And that's a time to really consolidate. That's a time to do lots of writing, to ask your teachers for feedback, to work with your friends and get each other to critique your work. So when the HSC actually starts in the 20th of October, you've got every course, except for studies, but certainly advanced and standard, have the 2 papers and EALD. You've got 5 questions in those 2 papers. And remember that you're going to have multi-sections, and you're used to this. If you do biology or history or any of those other writing subjects, you're used to having multi-parts and you're used to dividing your time accordingly. So paper 1, section 1 will have a number of parts, and it is very possible that paper 2, section 3, the craft of writing, will have more than 1 part as well. There's a lot of reading in these papers, and so the only way, of course, you're going to develop your reading skills is to be reading. So give yourself opportunities where you are reading under time conditions, and also you're having to do lots of writing. So this is a reading and writing exam, whether it be paper 1 or paper 2. So building your confidence, ask your teachers for past papers. Now, even though we've only had 1 in the current syllabus, in paper 2, there are a lot of texts that have been on for a long time. You know, some of them go back to even beyond 2009. So and the format of paper 2 hasn't changed very much either. So it's important to actually hold those papers so that you've got them there and you can navigate them, you can flick through, you can go and find where your module B text is so you're not laboriously reading everybody else's. Work out some reading time strategies, which I want to talk to you about. Practice what to look for in the unseen text, because they are really, they can be very overwhelming, especially there can be quite a lot of dense pieces of text, and you've got to know what to look for quickly and efficiently so you can write about them. And then, of course, writing under those time limits, because you will have very, very specific time limits in both of those particular exams. Now, there's lots of resources out there. That the HSC is a very big landscape with a lot of people who are wanting to help you. Now, please don't underestimate the necessite for the past examination papers and also the markers feedback. So you can download these yourself, and what I tend to do is I just put into my search engine past HSC exam papers. That'll take you to the necessite. Click on that and it'll take you to the particular exams. Go down to your course and click on that, and then you'll see the 2009 papers plus the markers feedback. I would be actually downloading it, and I would be, or putting it into a Word document so that you can say, okay, what did students last year do well? what didn't they do well? And it's interesting that a lot of those comments are very similar from year to year because students are still not, for example, allocating the correct amount of time for a particular question. But there's some, I thought last year's report was one of the best in a long time. So there's a lot of very, very valuable questions or responses there. So you can actually gain a great deal from this particular site. You can get past exams. Now, I know it's only 2019 in the absolute current form, but you can particularly look back at you know, if you've been doing something like Curious Incident, for example, or the Richards or Dunn and Witt, they've been on these papers now for some years, and so you can look at those questions. Past markers reports, I find very useful ways to actually answer section 1, and so they've got some sample responses of how you get into those, and that I think is a very good model for you. A glossary of key terms, and also some really, really good advice of what to take in and what not to take in. You know, for example, not to take in a smartwatch, to leave your phone perhaps in the car or at home that particular day. So those kind of things, so that you are ready, you are match ready when it comes to walking into that exam. Now, there's some terrific resources available. Cambridge, as I said to you, is in partnership with the ETA, and they are about to release their 2020-2021 resources, and they have some fantastic essays in there. You can access some of the essays at the moment online, but the fantastic thing about these new editions is they have some excellent activities to assist you with critiquing your work, or certainly I think they would be valuable classroom activities for teachers to be working with. The exam workbooks are on their way. These are the workbooks of outstanding scripts, and we already have the standard one, and that's I know lots of people are really interested in looking at that one because it's got craft of writing, which everybody's been hanging out to see, but it's also got some excellent work in there, so you can see that they're on their way. Keep looking. I think it's a little bit of a tricky site, the NESA shopping online, and these new ones don't come up as soon as you open that particular site. So keep trawling, or contact NESA, because it is important that you can be getting those resources for you. Okay, and let's now think about, all right, you're about to start looking at all of your modules. Once you get those out of the way, how do they differ? What is the distinctive elements of each one of those modules? Because once you work out what is different about them, you'll be able to use those differences to drive your revision and also your responses. Very important, particularly when it comes to the common module, and this was one of the examiners' comment, that this is not a close study. So we really need to make sure that every unit we're doing, every module we're doing is not a closed study. That is just module B, closed study for standard and critical study for advanced. So the core, what it is about the essence of the module, should be driving your rereading, driving your revision, driving your responding to questions, and also driving the actual selection of the textual detail that you need to be incorporating into your responses. So I've just put this together over the last few days, and I'm sure I've missed some of the key features, but I just wanted to show how you could structure your own mind map, for example, or your own chart. And I would be suggesting that you do this perhaps in groups, and if you want to do it on the computer, terrific. But sometimes it's good to get those, you know, that old-fashioned skills, some big sheets of paper, some text to colours, or using the walls in your classroom. And I know some schools are doing that, and that you just draw out from the module statement those key phrases. So with your common module, what are the various human experiences which you have identified in your particular text? How do they fit in with the inconsistencies, the paradoxes? How do they fit in with telling a story about the human experiences? How do they show you the motivations of the characters? But more importantly, is this idea of representation. In what ways? How? How is the critical aspect of why we do English? We need to see how we're being positioned, how we're being manipulated, shaped by the writer to come to their perspective about the human experience. So how is your particular composer using form? And that's very important, that you look at the features of form, particularly in something like 1984 or In Past the Shallows or The Crucible. How are they using setting? And that important aspect about the characters interacting with the setting is very significant as well. The language they use, the ideas, the characters, the structure. So that's just a very, very broad way of looking at the common module. When we look at the advanced module A, we're looking at the ideas and concepts that are in each one of those texts, but also how did the context of each one of the text shape and value those particular ideas. I like to say, what did each context value? What did they hold as important? And then, do we still hold those values as important today? Some of them, particularly when we're looking at texts that say are 300 or 400 years old, some of those values have changed, but really a lot of them haven't. So in lots of cases, the more things change, the more they stay the same. How are those texts similar and how are they different? How have they explored common or disparate issues? What about the perspectives they're giving you on some of the ideas? And does that comparison reveal a resonance there, or a dissonance? Is it a mirroring, a collision? And in all of that, of course, we should be saying, why is that? And it should come back to because of the context. When you look at Module B, one of the features, and this goes for standard as well, and I'll show your slide in a minute, you become the expert. You must become the expert on your text. So you become an expert on Eliot or on Maloof or on Henry or Great Expectation. And so the question can be absolutely anywhere. And it is the most traditional kind of question. It could be on ideas or language, or it could be on its relevance today. And also, this is where we want you to expand your understanding by researching your text, not so that you can say, you know, this particular academic said that and another one said this. It's more to inform your own understanding and to enrich you and to bolster up your understanding and ideas. And the important thing about Module B is that you can expect an extract from anywhere in the text, from any poem, from any scene, from any part of the novel. And so when my students used to say, well, how many poems do we need to do if we're doing Eliot? And I'd say, don't ask that question, because you need to know absolutely every one of those. And when we get to Module C, I think for me, the core of Module C is you are now the writer. You've been exploring all of these writers. Now you are the writer. So how well can you write? How well can you craft a piece of writing? And then if we do have a part B, it's going to be you as the critic, and you are going to be critiquing your own writing. And sometimes you may be asked to talk about how your own writing was influenced or inspired or shaped by other writers. How well can you explain this? And that is something that I hope you're going to be really starting to develop. By the time, when we get to the standard course, the common module is going to be exactly the same, because that's a common paper. But when we look at Module A, it's very much about language and how the language of your text shapes and also reflects a community or an individual's culture and identity. So what are the elements of culture and identity, and how is language being used in your particular text? And of course, the castle there is very popular, but there are other ones that work exceedingly well in Module A. I think that's a fantastic course, actually. And Module B is similar in some ways to critical study, but its focus in this case are the distinctive features of the text. So what stands out for you in Namatjira or Feed or Midsummer's Night's Dream or in Curious Incident, any one of those texts. So like Advanced, you've got to become an expert. What are all the ideas? And I guarantee you, you think you've got all the ideas worked out for Curious Incident, and I could bet that the exam will come up with a different idea. So the more ideas you can throw around, because it's really important that you don't straitjacket yourself into just a few themes or issues or ideas. What about the structure? What about the setting? setting, the characterization. And again, that extract can come, and I've marked Module B in Standard where we've had an extract from the opening of a poem, or the opening of a novel, or the middle part of a novel, or the end of the novel, or the end of a poem. So you need to be able to say, that's okay, whatever poem they ask me to look at, I'll be fine with that. Whatever part of the novel, whatever part of the play, I'll be fine. And similarly with Module C, it is about crafting that piece of writing. You as a writer, and you being able to critique your own work. And of course, you've got to have something to critique, haven't you? You've got to have some effective writing there. It can't be just something very bland that you might have written in the same way, you know, you fall. It's got to be a rich piece of writing, so you've got plenty to critique. Okay, so just a couple of things, and this is from Karen Yago. She puts up this lovely little book for her students, and she's shared it in many different places. But I think this is a nice way of just summarising the human qualities, the flaws and emotions, because that's all those words about paradoxes and inconsistencies and anomalies. That just means we're pretty weird as humans, and sometimes we behave in ways that we shouldn't behave, or we would prefer we didn't behave. And so look at some of the characters. What are those flaws? What are those human anomalies and paradoxes in the way they do it? And of course, that role of storytelling is very important. So you can see there that there's some very, very important questions. What is the composer's context? What individual or collective human experiences are there? And how do the individuals respond? And how have you had your ideas about humanity challenged? Because that's the great thing about English, is it gets us to look at the world in different ways. And that, what I find, is such an exciting thing for us to be doing. Representation is sometimes overlooked by students, and I'd like you to start using this term if you haven't already, so that you need to be talking about the representation of the ideas or the perspectives. It's more than just how, because it embeds in into the text, and therefore into the responder, attitudes, beliefs and values. And so it's more than just showing and demonstrating. So look at the number of times that the word representation and representing is in fact in the module statement, particularly in that first paragraph. Really, really critical that you take that on board. Just looking at those covers there of 1984, we've got some really important covers to show you how the ideas are represented. So what did the designers have in mind when they were representing 1984 with black and red, for example? What were they trying to show in this one here with those faces? So think about and look at that face there, and who, of course, is that? So that's an act of representation, which is really important that you have a look at. So please use that particular text. One of the key points that I want you to come away from today is your ability to be flexible, to be able to think on your feet. And so particularly when it comes to the common module, you will have, I'm sure, looked at a range of ideas and themes. Expand those. Look for synonyms for all of the different ideas you've talked about, because the more ideas you've got, the more variations you've got, you will be able to have much more flexibility when it comes to responding to the question, you know, which may be a question that you haven't seen before. So, for example, this is just one little task. In 2019, there was a range of abstract nouns which were really interesting, and of course, for some of them, they were, you know, absolutely dead certainty. So it's very easy to consider courage with all the light you cannot see, or loss with past the shallows. But love, for example, with The Crucible, and deception with Merchant of Venice, and loneliness for 1984, it did throw a few people. But when you start to unpack those words, you could see pathways in there. So what you might like to consider doing as a bit of a class exercise or even individually is to replace all of those for each text. So with all the light you cannot see, how does it demonstrate and represent resilience, loneliness, loss, aging, struggle, independence, strength? How does Billy Elliot show resilience, loss, struggle, love, deception? Okay, so see if those work, because you are expanding and building your flexibility and building that, what we call dexterity, your ability to be able to, roll with the question on the day. So think about some revision strategies, and I would suggest that you do this also with a pen and a paper. Mind maps, I think they are starting to come back, and as I say, if you've got walls in your classroom that you can use for this, and also be creating some your tables. One of the things about creating a mind map is that it quickly reinforces what you actually already know, and it'll be like a brainstorm, and you're getting all of these points out onto your mind map. And then you might see some gaps, and that's what's important. It's no point keep going over the same material. We do that as human beings. We keep doing what is familiar because that's much easier. So now you can be saying, okay, where is it that I actually haven't come to terms with this particular text or this particular module? Graphic organizers, if you want to be looking at mind maps or looking at tables, you could say, okay, let's brainstorm on our table or our map. What are the key features of the module? How is it explored in the text? What are the key ideas? What are all the features about the characters, and how are they formed into characters? What happens where and when? And that, for something like Henry IV, is important. Oh, and the Crucible, because there's so many different things happening, and you want to get it clear about what is happening to whom and where and when. The settings and how the characters interact. And then, of course, we want you to be building up lots of wonderful textual examples, not so that you can learn them off, because that's a very difficult skill, but you can have some paraphrases, you can have some examples, you can have some direct quotes for all of your tasks. Making connections between texts. Those of you who are doing Sylvia Plath, for example, Karen McEwen has done an excellent job of this, where she has made connections between the various poems. And considering that both of those textual forms of poetry, that makes it work really well. I've also looked at Peter Ram's Robert Gray presentation, and he does an excellent job too of talking about looking at the poems and making those connections. So again, and he creates tables, but you could also do mind maps. So for example, if you're doing a suite of poems, how do they connect to the module? So how does one poem connect with the other poem? What are various scenes or episodes that you can take from your film or from your novel or from your play that will connect to the key ideas of the module? So this is just one example. So they're our poets. So what are the features of the module that are being represented, for example, by Slessor and Dobson in the human experience? What are the ideas and issues and concepts that Eckermann, or the contemporary Australian Asian poetry collection? What are the ideas and issues in Dunn's poetry, for example, or in Keats' poetry? And then, of course, how are they being mirrored or reflected, mirrored or collided with, or showing some resonance in the modern text? And look at the linguistic devices, the language choices in Udrunu Nunkel's work, in T.S. Eliot, in Maloof, and of course making those connections between Plath and Hughes as well. Similarly, if you're doing short stories or film or prose fiction, try to look at these in your in creating those revision mind maps, tables. What are the features? What are the ideas? What are the language choices being made there? And of course, one of the critical aspects here is that we need to be building up our writing. The best way to become a writer is to write. So reading lots of different questions, writing your introductions in pairs, critiquing each other's, brainstorm really quickly. It's this quick thinking that you want to be doing. And also that idea of personal response, that doesn't just mean, and and it doesn't mean that you have to write in the first person if you can, but what it does mean is that you need to be strong and bold and passionate and genuine and fresh. You are coming through in this essay, and markers love to see that personal response coming through. Stop typing and start writing by hand. And I think certainly if you haven't started doing that by term 3, practice in the line booklets. Consider 7 to 9 words per line, because that's easier to read, but it also is going to make sure that you're not just writing a couple of pages. Dark black pen. Is your writing legible? Mine's becoming more and more illegible all the time. Writing in timed responses, and I would suggest before the trial that you actually do 2 papers in 1.5 hours for paper 1, and of course 2 hours. And what we're trying to do here is to build your flexibility. So let's just have a look at looking at paper 1 here. It's important that you start taking control of your own success. This is your HSC. And so look at what the paper looks like, realizing this is actually 40% of your English mark that will be out of the way by the time you finish that particular one. Practice your exam writing, access other papers, unpack and workshop in class what you're doing, and really start to build your vocabulary about this. And it's important that you use all of those resources on Nessa's site for that. Now, section 1 is an important area for your writing here. It's exactly the same question. Sorry, it's similar section for all of the different courses, and there's going to be some similarities and some differences. What is important for you is that the reading section is exactly the same mark value as your module. So you think about all of the time that you might be spending on module B or what you've spent on module A. This is exactly the same mark value, and you are not likely to have ever seen these texts before. You're going to have different questions worth different marks. So that's what I'm talking about, your ability to be dexterous, your ability to think on your feet when you look at all those different questions. My feelings is that it is not given the time, and it is not given the serious attention that it should be given. I know in some schools it is, but there is a little bit of a consideration that thought that if students can read and write, they can do this section. It needs to be practiced. It needs very, very specific skills. It's a different set of skills to writing a sustained essay. How much dedicated time have you actually given to the reading component in paper 1? Because it is, let's look at it strategically, it is worth 20 marks. So the what and the how, which is the fundamental features of section 1, will also occur when you are doing your own craft of writing. What have you written and how well you have written, and then you need to critique that. So you'll be writing a number of short responses, and it could be 4 or 5 or even 6 questions. And those answers could be as short as 2 or 3 sentences, as long as 2 pages. You need to give yourself lots of opportunity to write in those short and longer time frames. This question, this particular section, is about accuracy. It's about being precise. It's about being clear and succinct. Many years ago, decades ago, this used to be a multiple choice section. So that's where you could be right or wrong, and you can still be right or wrong. Being able to specifically reference textual details, and of course to show your understanding, in this case, of the common module. When we say how, in my many decades of being a marker and a senior marker, we used to flesh that word out. What does how mean? It always means in what ways. And it's not just zoning in or zooming in and looking at the techniques. Stand back. What is actually happening in this text? Who is telling the story, or who is telling the point of view and giving that perspective? What is the setting happening here? What worries me, and that's why I put specific language choices last, is that students zoom into the onomatopoeia or the metaphor, but they haven't stood back and looked at what is actually happening. What are the characters doing? But more importantly, what are the ideas about humanity? What are the universal truths that are coming through in this particular text? And so First of all, what is the text saying about the human experiences? Find those emotive words or salient images which will jump out at you to help you understand. Then build your analytical sentences by talking about the meaning first and then talking about the actual technique. What are those techniques? And please, if you don't take very much away from me today, please take this. Never talk about a technique without talking about an effect. So you need to give yourself lots of writing activities where you can do that. So create your own opportunities. Don't wait for your teacher to do this. So you can all access the 2019 Section 1. Ask your teacher for their 2019 trial. Set up some study buddies around the state and ask them to send you their school trial. Use your prescribed text. Critique all of your novels for the opening, for the covers, for the just look at the ending of all of your novels, for example, or the ending of your plays. Read widely so that you are building up your knowledge of the different forms. And of course, growing your skills is what we want you to do in reading and writing. So let's just look at some paper one strategies here. Of course, time management is critical. And why? Because it not only is going to help you get through this particular section, but you're going to feel good about yourself. You're going to feel that you are on top of this, and we want you coming out of this first exam feeling as though you nailed it, feeling confident for the next round. So think about how well you can look at the reading time. And you know, all the time I was in the classroom, I don't think I ever did this. I don't think I ever said, let's practice looking at what you can do in the reading time. But of course, I've done a lot of it since then. Planning and preparation is important. Of course, time allocation is critical. Now, in that 10 minutes, you can do a lot in that 10 minutes, but the first thing I would do is quickly flick through the paper. It's going to be in two parts, so you need to detach that straight away. Quickly read the essay. You don't need to spend very much time on that, but you just want to read that common module essay just so you can say, oh, great, that's perfect. That will fit my particular understanding of Past the Shallows so well. But the majority of the time, and I'm suggesting, 9.5 minutes, and this is where I want you to practice this, go back to section 1. Read the examination rubric at the top because it forces you to go back to the core of the module. Ask yourself, how many questions? What are they worth? Okay, it's 20 marks. I need to be spending 40 minutes of that writing. Therefore, I've got to be allocating that time. If it's 2 marks, how many points should I make? And I'm suggesting 2, possibly even 3. Have a look at the question. What are they requiring you to do? Very easy to misread the questions. This will be your very, very first exam, and it's really easy not to have that sort of match practice for exam strategies. Have a quick look at the text types and the textual form, because the textual form will give you some ideas to the convention. So if it's an autobiography, you'll know that it is in fact written by the person whose name is at the bottom, that it's their story and it's going to be in the first person. Maybe the title is going to give you some hints to the content or the perspective. Maybe you know something about this particular writer. And also, if you have a question, and it could be the last question or the second last question, where it's asking you to talk about 2 texts, which 2 texts will you be talking about if you're given free choice? Okay, so most of the 10 minutes, so I'm suggesting about 8 minutes, should be reading your text. Detach those that question sheet, come back and keep on looking at the question. If you don't look at the question before you read the text, you're missing out on valuable pointers to put into your head. Because remember, this is all without a pen. You can't highlight anything. You've got to be doing this in your head. What is the text saying about the human experience? And one of the easier ways to look at that, is it a positive experience or a negative one? And then what are the different ways? Okay, so where the reading time is over, you're not quite ready to start writing yet. You've only got 45 minutes for this one, and I say only because we do not want you taking any more time from that. Spend about 5 or 10 minutes in prep, and that means that you've got about 35 or 40 minutes. But please don't think that you can take any time from section 2. Look at the question. Make sure you understand what each question is requiring you to do. Now you can get that highlighter up. Highlight the evidence in your unseen text which explores or represents those human experiences. Highlight the language features which align with the question. The more highlights you have, the better you will be for your sustained response, which will be coming a bit further into the questions. Now, have a look at the 2009 paper, because we had questions on a separate page for each question with writing lines. And those writing lines are a guide, but you need to be saying, okay, can I respond to that particular question quickly and succinctly and accurately in that number of lines, and give yourself time to practice that. This is just a little bit of a schema that I've worked out. It doesn't have to be sacrosanct, but the important thing is if you've got a 6 marker or a 5 marker, do you have 10 or 12 minutes left to respond to that? Because they are going to be the mini essays. And so it's really strategically very important. You've got those times there left for you, that you've actually got 12 minutes left if you get a 6 marker. So let's just quickly look at section 2. You would have known these from the sample paper, that we could be looking at a generic question, which will be for everybody. It could be a very specific question about some theme or issue or idea or concept of your own text. It could be about the form. It could be about the nature of storytelling. Your role now, and it could also have a quote that's got nothing to do with the prescribed text, more about the how texts represent human experiences. So your opportunity now is, can you write a response? Can you write a good, solid, structured introduction on each one of these particular areas? How well can you respond to if it's about an ideas, for example, or emotions, or the motivations of characters, or the complexities of people, or how challenging people can be, or how storytelling makes sense of the human experience, or the choice of form. So you think about your text, whatever that text may be, of I think it's 14 in that particular list. Can you write a good, solid response if it was any one of those particular areas? What are those experiences, emotions? And of course, when I do Past the Shallows, I love looking at the images of Bruny Island. Stand back. What are the big ideas in your particular text? And you can be brainstorming these in your groups, individually, or in the whole class, as you start to revisit the common module for the trial, and of course for the October. What is the form, and how does this form actually shape the representations of the human experience? What are the key features of the form? How is setting used and characterization, the narrative voice, the symbol, the language choices specific to the form? And remember, I showed you this one, the 2009 paper, and it asked you to look at that particular feature of humanity and invite you to reconsider your understanding of that particular experience. So it's the same question for each one of the courses. Everyone gets the same amount of time. Everyone will be allocated the same mark of 20. You'll be actually marked by the same criteria, and it is marked by a single cohort. And I think that's really important for students in studies and standard to realise that your competition here is particularly tough. And we know that some of the abstract nouns were more accessible than others. But what is important is that if you think that you can get yourself a formulaic, one-size-fits-all essay, you need to think again, because you really need to be starting to think about, what does this to what extent mean, and how can you best adapt your knowledge and thinking? Because always the ability to answer the question has always been a significant discriminator of the marking system for decades. We're not just talking about under the new system. If you look at the criteria, you'll see they are all exactly the same. And so I'm just going to look at this one here. Please look at the adjectives, because how well can you do this? Can you actually answer the question skillfully? Are you showing an insightful response? Are your textual references well supported and detailed? Are you providing a response which is coherent or sustained? Or is it just in this range, this adequate? And see where the question is. The question, answering the question, when I say about having some formulaic essay ready to roll, is going to be very tricky to make sure it fits this question. A range you'd expect. B range you'd expect. It's actually here in the C range. So if you forget about the question, if you ignore the question, you really do that at your own peril. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to focus on this third dot point because this is about how well you write, how well you organise your ideas, how you answer the question, how you develop your thesis, and of course the important thing is about, you know, answering that question. So there's quite a few examples of questions around on the human experience. So the first thing to do would be to highlight them and then to say, okay, what are those key words? How can I put some synonyms in there so I'm not just writing complexity, 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 shape, language choices all the time? And so I like to do this, and I think it's important that you do this in your groups and in your class, that you unpack and you look at all of the different kinds of words. So this complexity fits beautifully into the challenges, the paradoxes, the anomalies that people have demonstrated and are represented in your particular text. So then when you unpack them, put them back into the, I know it makes it a very clumsy kind of question, but it keeps you focusing on what I should be looking at, the challenges, the difficulties, the emotions facing the characters and situation. And then what are the language choices? And so you might like to, you might be doing all, well, I've just chosen a couple here. What is the language of prose fiction? And of course, what are the complexities that he is representing in his wonderful novel? The textual detail, what are the complexities that you would actually choose? How are they represented? What textual evidence would you do? More importantly, have you actually written a previous response which could work, that you could take out some textual detail? And I'm not saying a totally pre-prepared formulaic response, but something that you've written that will fit in nicely. And of course, the question is there, how much have you actually written? If you did a multimodal on your common module, how many actual traditional style responses have you written since then? Include the evidence, and of course the evidence must suit the question on the day. The key point that markers are looking for is specific textual detail. Well chosen, relevant, detailed, analysed, and if you can, well integrated. The introduction is where the marker is going to get their first taste, and they're going to forgive you that this could be a bit woolly at the first, but if you can convince the marker right from the beginning that you know your text, that you've answered the question, and you have a strong thesis. Even though I do lots of writing, the first few lines for me are always the most difficult. And so if you've got a little bit of a phrase that can get you into that, not so that it's pre-prepared, but that it's something that is helping that writing process. And then follow with the key points of the question. Make sure you reference the text in full, the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. After that, you can just call it the text or the novel. But you need to, of course, have the full text in that introduction. There's an example of what I was saying to you about having this generic point. Being part of the human race can be difficult and challenging. And then I go through, you can have these kind of words, a provocative and chilling novel. You could have the choice of satire and dystopia. You can have compelling characterization, evocative imagery. That's some phrases that you can be using. If you were doing Billy Elliot, you could be doing the same thing. The social and economic change, the family breakdown, pursuing one's dream, the use of music, clever characterization, important vehicles. All of these kind of phrases are going to be useful for you. Try and think about one major idea or insight, which you then flesh out in your body paragraphs. I like to see students use a topic sentence that links back to the question, because it does help students avoiding that idea of retell and narrative. And you might like to come back to that, but I don't necessarily want you to think about a highly structured formulaic, but we do want some signposts that you are still answering that question. And I believe that the conclusion shouldn't be a summing up. It should be a really strong, bold, fresh, genuine comment about the module and about the text. But that's my personal point of view. Focusing on the active representation is important. In your own writing, I would suggest that you critique each other. So you could highlight wherever you answered the question, and that should look like a nice river running through. In another colour, highlight the textual detail. And you might see, gosh, there isn't much by the time I get to the third paragraph. And you've got to make sure that you help yourself there. Read exemplar essays, not only from the NESA and Cambridge, but other students in your school would have some outstanding essays. Building your own critical analysis that you are borrowing and using those wonderful phrases. Here are some HSC style questions for the common module, and so there are a range here that you could be using, and you might like to over the next few days practice writing the introductions to some of these, because you can revisit these particular talks. You can stop and start them at any time. Just very briefly, I want to talk about paper 2. Both, of course, both papers, standard and advanced, have 5 minutes reading time, and each section is 40 minutes. So again, really, really critical that you give yourself opportunities to write under these strict time frames. I don't want to spend time on the modules, because you've really had some excellent material over, if not already this past fortnight, certainly you will be seeing them soon. But I do want to briefly talk about craft of writing, because this is about expanding your repertoire, but it is also about looking at those texts. And so there's 18 in standard and 19 in advanced. And so you can be using those texts as a springboard, but not just how well the writer might use the first person or symbols, but what about their ideas? What about their form? What about their tone and their narrative voice? And so in this particular question, you might have a stimulus, and it's very important that you look at the Marcus report, because this is a very detailed Marcus report. The big question you're going to be asking yourself is, gosh, have I got 40 minutes left? And if I have got 40 minutes left, and I hope you have, how are you going to divide that time if it's a two-parter? And of course, the answer to that is you are going to divide that time according to the marks. Is it going to be 10 and 10? Is it going to be 12 and 8? Is it going to be 8 and 12? You have to be really vigilant about allocating that time. And think about the kinds of writing. How much imaginative writing have you been doing this year and in year 11? And discursively and persuasively. And you can actually put them together as a hybrid. And so when you're doing your reading of your text, look at the insights and the ideas that you can be gaining from those short texts. And then, of course, the second part is, we've been calling it, or it was originally called reflective, but I think it is more of a critique. It's more of a justification. It's more of a developing your understanding of how well you as a writer have been writing, and how you can critique that piece of writing. And so when you are critiquing your own writing, this actually requires a lot of time and attention to do very well. And I think this is where you can lose some critical marks. And I know the HSC is not all about the marks, but for those of you who are particularly wanting to get into a certain course at university, every mark really does count, and you want to know that you've done your personal best. So when you do your justification or reflection or critiquing, it has to be done with insight. It's not just off the top of your head. It's not just anything goes. So you're critiquing yourself as a writer, but the big question is, you must have something to critique. And start with opening, and this came from the Marcus comment. Open with what your intention is, that you're writing this piece of persuasive writing to, or imaginative or discursive, and what is your purpose? What's your intention? Be very specific. This is no time for waffle. This is get down to the very specific aspects of what you are critiquing. Reference your own language choices. And then if it does ask you to talk about how you were influenced by the Module C writers, how they have helped you to develop your skills in symbolism, in tone, in dialogue, in establishing setting, and referencing your Module C text. Now, I've used this example in, and I'm just about to finish up now, I've used this example for standard craft of writing. I think this is a terrific text. This was from section 1, and it was a common question for both standard and advanced. So if I was sitting in your classroom, I would be saying this is one of the bounce off points that we can use this particular presentation today. And you could spend a couple of lessons on looking at this particular piece from Samuel Wagon Watson. And you know, a number of teachers told me that this was the question that threw quite a few students, because it didn't look like a traditional poem for them. But it's a beautiful piece of writing, and it is a classic situation of reading it out loud. And maybe, you know, inside your head, in the hurly-burly of the exam, maybe that was one of the things that threw students as well. So you could work with this. And then, okay, the question was about how does he achieve this intensity. So look at what are the different, stand back, the narrative voice, the sentence lengths, look at the tense, the imagery. Then what I would suggest you do is that you talk about an intense moment. And I think that 2019, 2020 will have lots of intense moments, whether you were like these boys who are looking at this area in Lake Conjola that was, you know, burning furiously over New Year's Eve in 2020. So I think we've all got some intense moments, and some intense moments of living in this new world of coronavirus. Describe one in your, so write your own piece, only 150 words. Then I want you to compare the ways you created your intensity with Watson. So you are looking at two writers here, you and Watson. And so that, I think, would work as an interesting way of segueing from section 1, paper 1, into the craft of writing. And so here are some more of those. There's just so many fantastic images about the bushfires in our past summer. Don't forget these Cambridge resources. They actually have some terrific Module C responses, not just in the Part A, but also in the Part B. There's a marvellous one of looking at the surfer and then critiquing that one on the surfer, which is excellent. And also, this is already out, the standard one, but it has some terrific Module C, and I'm really looking forward to looking at the advanced one as well. So here's just a couple of takeaway ideas. Be prepared, and the only way you can do that, of course, is lots of reading, but more importantly, lots of writing. Create your own opportunities. Don't wait for your teachers to do this. Review and reread your text. Try and look at as many different questions as you can. Learn from your peers. They are the ones who have come up with some fabulous ideas or a different way of looking at something. Ask for feedback and incorporate that feedback, because you've got a wealth of experience and talent in the teachers, in your faculties, in your school. And remember too that you are not alone, that we are here for you, your teachers are here for you, your parents are here for you, and there are, you know, 75,000 other people who will be sitting in that same exam hall throughout the state in October. So all the best, and thank you for being part of this very important and valuable, and we're very proud of this particular experience that the ETA is able to provide you with. So all the best and take care. Thank you.